A huge predictor of your relationship success has to do with your credit score. That's according to a working paper by the Federal Reserve Board. So what they did is they looked at the data and they found a high link between having a high credit score and the likelihood of both entering into a committed relationship and staying in one. So let's take a quick look at the two graphs in question here, graphic number 29. So when it comes to lasting relationships, as you can see, the higher your credit score, the higher your likelihood of being in that long-term happy relationship or forming that happy relationship. When it comes to the odds of separation, you see a similar trend. The higher your credit score, the less likely you are to separate from your significant other.
So there's two different things if I've got it right. One is it says if your credit score is high, you're more likely to stay in a relationship. The other is that if your credit scores match,
yes,
you're more likely to stay together.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you have a huge difference, there's a huge disparity between your credit scores. According to this study, there's a high correlation between that disparity and the likelihood of you guys breaking up.
So they jokingly say that the first thing you should ask on a date is, hey, what's your credit score?
That's real romantic.
It super is. Like, hey, how you doing? Oh, where'd you grow up? You grew up in LA. That's really cool. What's your credit score?
Okay, so that brings up an interesting question, Cenk. When is the right time? Because you don't ask that on a first date. You don't wait until you're married to ask that. How do you bring up finances when you're in a relationship? Because that's probably the most uncomfortable thing, aside from talks about STDs, that you could possibly bring up.
I mean, I don't know, man. If you're going to move in together, okay, that is a rational time to ask for a credit score because it might affect whether you get the credit for a mortgage or even in rent situations, they sometimes check your credit score. You're going to buy some major thing. Otherwise, it's super awkward. You can't be like, hey, you know, so we've been dating like 4 months. I was just kind of wondering, what's your favorite color and what's your credit score, right? It's never going to not be awkward unless you're filling out a form and be like, hey, Bob, what's your credit score?
Yeah.
Because you need it for the form. So it's something you're not going to easily find out. I mean, you could dance around it and you could be like, oh my God, I got my credit card bill the other day. I missed it once. But they were nice to me. They took it off because I never miss it.
Yeah.
You see, what I just did there was I told you I have a high credit score and invited you to tell me your credit stories, which will give me an indication of what your credit score is. Now, that's the thing you do if you're a dick. Okay. Don't do that. It's still cheesy. It's just a cheesy way of doing the dick move.
Also, look, this paper by the Federal Reserve Board is basically finding a correlation, right? Which doesn't necessarily mean much, okay? However, what I'm wondering is, what happens when someone has a low credit score because they have a tremendous amount of student loan debt, which the majority of millennials do,
Then
right?
they deserve everything they get, including their failed relationships. Okay, now look, don't get me wrong, and I'm going to flip completely to the other side. I believe this, okay? And I think, look, people who are generally responsible find each other and then stay in relationships. It's not that surprising, right? And a person who's with someone who's responsible but is not responsible themselves, they'll clash a lot. Now, is your credit score a perfect indication of whether you're responsible and trustworthy? Of course not, right? But is it some indication? Sometimes, right? And so we did a story here about employers checking credit scores before they hire people. And I'm an employer, but it still grates on me. I don't need to know that much about you, man. And I will figure it out through other context clues without getting into the orifices of your life, right? I don't need to probe that deep. And you don't need to do it on the first date. So it's okay to try to find like-minded people. You should. You're much more likely to stay together. That part of the story is true. I believe the numbers in the story, but that doesn't mean that you should aggressively be anal enough to be like, okay, what's your credit score? Well, then I'm not going to date you. Nobody likes that person. The chance of that person breaking up is 100%.
Very true, very true.
They didn't do a graph on that, but they should.
Yeah, I don't know. Talks about finances suck. And it's a very uncomfortable thing to bring up. But I do think that, especially if you're going to marry someone, you got to know what you're getting yourself into.